Thank you. Wow, what a lovely crowd. I hate it when people read out, sorry, Pete, I hate it when people read out those bios because they sound a lot better when they're written than when they're read out in front of an audience. I felt quite sort of embarrassed by that. But thank you anyway. Okay, so a few years ago, I spotted a trend. A lot of my friends had moved from being individual contributors to leading a team, to leading a whole department, maybe being a head or director, or even a VP of design. They'd finally got the seat at the table they've all wanted for so long. But rather than being happy, they were more stressed than ever before. They'd hoped that somehow being a leader would solve all their problems. But actually, it just created a whole bunch of new ones, problems they'd never had to deal with before. I think they'd fallen for this myth of leadership, that somehow all you needed is power to make change and everything would magically get better. However, it turns out that authority and power generally isn't enough. Power gives you the opportunity to influence, but power alone won't cut it. Instead, you need to develop a whole set of new skills, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in this presentation. So as I talked to my friends over tea and cake, well, I'm British, it felt like I was having the same conversation over and over again. It felt like it was sort of Groundhog Day. A lot of my friends have found themselves in the brilliant position where the company's finally got design, and they'd been hired to kind of grow the team, to improve the impact they had on design. At the interview, this sounded great, but it was becoming problematic really quickly. They were inundated by resumes, but few people had the kind of quality of sort of design skills they were looking for, maybe only 18 months out of a General Assembly and already calling themselves a senior designer. If they found the right people, keeping them for longer than 18 months was really challenging. If you've ever spent any time in Silicon Valley, you'll know that people hop between jobs, maybe every 18 months, every 12 months, every 9 months. As a result, my friends weren't really design leaders. They were basically recruitment managers, which was really stressful. If they did manage to keep their team for longer than 18 months, it felt like everything was grinding down. They thought that adding new people would massively increase capacity. But weirdly, things were getting harder and harder to deliver. It was really frustrating, especially for my friends that come from an agency background. It seemed like a thing they would normally have done in agency world that would take 6 months was now taking 16. Also, they were finding that rather than focusing on the work, they were kind of being lifted up and they were having to manage the rest of the organization. It's all very well having a seat at the table, but quite often it felt like a high chair, and the designers were sat in the corner playing with the crayons while the adults talked business. Now, marketing had the budget, IT had the headcount, and the designers were just kind of coloring in over the side. And finally, if they had any time left, they were having to look after the team and make sure they were feeling loved, they were feeling looked after. And often, they were the first design leader in their company, so none of the infrastructure was in place. So it was all a bit of a mess. In fact, they started thinking to me and talking to me maybe design leadership wasn't for me. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should go back to the comfortable world of being an individual contributor where I know what I'm doing. I'm sure we've all felt familiar in our careers, this kind of idea that you're kind of stuck in this sort of valley of despair, that at some say someone would come and unmask you, Scooby-Doo style, for the fake that you know deep down that you really are. It's really stressful. So design leadership is relatively new. We've had technologists and marketers on the board for as long as we can remember, but design leadership at board level is still a novelty. I'd like to get an idea in the room. So who here would consider themselves a design leader? Not necessarily a manager, but a leader. So only a small number of you, maybe sort of 5%. That shows you how far we've got to go. Now, I have to say, this talk is mainly for you, so there's only about 5% of the audience, your primary target matter. But who has a manager? Who has a boss here? Few. Okay, you're my secondary personas. So if you have a boss, hopefully, your boss will be the best boss in the world. And everything I'm going to say now, they'll be mirroring amazing behavior. If they're not, maybe you can go back to them after the end of this talk and say, actually, I saw this guy speaking about what a good design leader is. Maybe you should watch his talk later. You've got to do it sort of in a nice way. You don't want to get fired or have an awkward conversation. So I myself have been an accidental leader for 14 years. I say accidental because who grows up dreaming of being a leader? It's kind of, I came from sort of the slacker generation where you'd watch sort of Office Space and the managers were the enemy. And then I suddenly found out that I was the enemy. It's quite scary. It's kind of tough to deal with. So to kind of like work through all of my anxieties, I did a couple of things. I founded a design leadership community. There's now a Slack community of about 1,500 heads, directors, and VPs, mostly of in-house teams. And I also started a conference, Leading Design. And I did both of these things because, frankly, I was failing. And I thought the best way to get better as a design leader was get the help from other people and talk to other people and get this experience. And it's been really, really valuable. And if you happen to be a design leader in the audience, the 5 or 6 of you put your hands up, if you want to get access to the Slack community, drop me an email and I'd love to kind of have you on board. Like I say, I never set out to be a design leader. I mean, sometimes I feel I'm the living embodiment of the Peter Principle. If you don't know the Peter Principle is the idea that people rise to the level of their own incompetence, which is why most of your bosses are probably incompetent, because that's where you sort of sit. And I know it might seem harsh, but when I started Clearleft, I sort of hated the classic model of design leadership. The superstar designer in the sort of black sort of like, turtleneck that would sort of surround themselves by young syncopatic juniors. And they would like the one source of truth, and everyone else would kind of run around kind of like sort of praising them. The design gods, I hated them. It was all very madmen. It was this traditional sort of pyramid sort of view of leadership, that the person sits above, kind of like having the sort of the ability to scan over the horizon, sitting on the shoulders of all the rest of their team. But the thing is, if you talk to people on the team, the weight of all those people above them ends up crushing their creativity. That never really attracted me. Instead, I preferred a more egoless sort of form of leadership, which I later discovered was called servant leadership. In a book, probably the weirdest book title I've ever read, called Orbiting the Big Giant Hairball. It's all about sort of creative leadership. They talk about leadership in creative terms more like a kind of a fruit tree. The leaders are the trunks and the branches, pushing the fruit to the sky to get nourishment, and the fruit are you, the creative people. And your job as a leader is to push the talent to the sort of skies, carrying their weight on your shoulders rather than the other way around. And for me, this was a much more attractive model of leadership. So it's a model I tried to adopt. It just seemed more grown up. It seemed, a way of sort of prioritizing continuing learning. So like I said, there were these sort of 5 problems that kept reoccurring. The first one was finding talent. And I think as a design leader and as a practitioner, you need to be constantly looking for talent. You need to become a talent scout. And to do that, you need to signal to the world that you're investing in people. So sending people on conferences like this, speaking on stage and sharing the amazing work your design team are doing, being a kind of an advocate for your internal design culture is really important. Building the team that other people want to be on. I know companies where people will kind of like hop between teams until they find one that kind of really sort of meets their goals. So if you're that team, be exciting and have people kind of drawn to you. The other thing I realize is money is just table stakes. There's lots of research that shows below a sort of threshold, money is really important, but above a threshold, people are looking for meaning in their lives. So if you hire great designers early, they will attract other great designers, and so you kind of get the ball rolling. Just focusing on cash alone won't do it. Your physical environment means a lot as well, And I'm not talking kind of sort of, foosball table and kind of like, slides and all that kind of stuff. But just, having plenty of wall space, having plenty of meeting rooms. Quite often as a design leader, you might end up having to fight HR to take those ugly pictures off the wall so you can stick up all your sticky notes and stuff. I did some work for a very, very high-end luxury brand, and they wanted the walls pristine. They were a design organization, but they wouldn't let designers stick anything up, which is kind of crazy. How can you say you're a design-focused organization if you want everything looking like the inside of a white cube? I think it's also important to build culture, to hire slowly and avoid brilliant arseholes. There's a lot, I'm sure we've all worked with them, people who are geniuses that are too good for the company to fire. But because they're there, they cause 3, 4, 5, 6 other people to leave. I think it's really important to hire slowly and make sure you hire the right people. Steve Jobs apparently used to say it's better to have a hole than an arsehole, which I always find funny because if you know anything about Steve Jobs' management style, I think there's an argument that says that every organization should only have one arsehole, a bit like every entity should only have one arsehole. So you've hired some amazing people. How do you keep them longer than sort of like 3 or 4 months? Well, first of all, I think the first thing is to make sure you follow through with your interview promises. So many of my friends go to an interview, and the leader says all these great things about their company, and you go, well, this sounds like heaven. And you get on day one, and it turns out the company isn't like that. The company is actually in a mess, and the design leader wants it to be like that, but it's not there at the moment. And then you feel like you've been cheated. You left somewhere that's probably really nice to kind of go into this sort of chaotic environment. So you have to be honest, and you have to make sure that the things you say in your interview, you're actually living through. And a lot of this comes from having clear mission, clear values, clear principles. But again, like, every company's got principles, and so often you go in and the principles are not adhered to. Culture isn't what you say your organization does. Culture is how you behave. You can have any set of principles on the wall you want, but if you're not living them, you're basically lying. So you kind of really want to foster a collaborative culture that people don't want to leave. At the end of the day, most people stick around because of the team. They've got a great team of people that they want to support. And if you can build a team that looks after each other, then people will want to stay to support that team. However, you also need to be careful. People have got social lives. It's all very well kind of like having like end of the week kind of like tequila shot parties and having these sort of crazy weekends away and whenever. I think a lot of kind of Silicon Valley companies are really into that kind of like drinking sort of partying culture. It kind of might work in your 20s. If you're in your 30s and your 40s, you probably just want to kind of get home and look after your kids or frankly do anything outside work. And to be honest, it's really awkward if your boss says, hey, are you sticking around to do tequila shots? Even if you might not want to, you're going to feel sort of awkwardly pressurized. So if you are a design leader or any kind of leader, respect the fact that your team have outside lives. And as much as possible, do the kind of like the bonding stuff in office time. And at the end of the day, if you are a design leader and people are leaving your organization, it's all very well to kind of like try and sort of manage your own ego by letting people know that, like, oh, they probably weren't right for the company anyway. But to be honest, you are probably the main reason why people leave. There's loads of research that shows that people don't leave companies, they leave bad bosses. So another reason why people leave is just getting burnt out, particularly in-house. You look at the last 18 months, and it's been tough. And you look at the next 18 months, and it looks exactly the same. Why would you stick around? So again, you need to schedule time to experiment. You need to take people out of the grind of 2-week design sprints and allow them time to explore and have fun and be creative and be innovative. So many companies these days bang on about the power of innovation and then lock you in a never-ending cycle of 2-week design sprints. Where's the innovation in that? And whether it's hack days, whether it's 20% time, there's lots of mechanisms to do this. Okay, you've got a team, they're happy, they're sticking with it. How can you help them execute at pace? The skill of a great design leader is to remove barriers. That's what you're there to do. Design systems are a great way of increasing productivity. And if you've got a really, really good design system, then the growth of design ops is really important. If you have a design team that's more than about 20 to 30 people, you need a design ops function. The design ops function is there to stop having the designers do all of the crap that isn't design, to get all of those barriers out of their way so the designers can focus on delivering great work. The other thing is I think a lot of design leaders, or a lot of leaders in general, think they're too good to do the menial work. But when your team are stacked, when they're kind of sprinting to hit a deadline, the only person that's left to kind of pick up the trash is you. So you should be walking around the studio, and if you see that the water tank is finished, don't just like wait until the person comes to refill it yourself. If you see rubbish lying around, picking it up. Your job as a leader is to model good behavior. And if you let the small things slide, everybody else will follow suit. So I don't know if any of you have come across a project Aristotle. It was a Google project. They surveyed all of their teams, basically, all of their product teams, to figure out what was the key to sort of amazing sort of productivity. And then lots of things came up. The ability to have impact, the meaning in your work, structure and clarity and dependability were all important. But the number one thing that was important was psychological safety. I'm sure you've heard this all before, so I won't sort of bang on about it too much. But you need to create a space where people feel safe to say things, and if the boss doesn't like them, know that they're not going to get into trouble. That they can say that the thing you're doing is wrong, and the boss isn't going to then hold it over you, hold you back, kind of give you a bad sort of, review at the end of the year. You need to create safe spaces. Okay, so you're delivering at pace. A lot of design leaders, or leaders in general, focus a lot of their effort on managing up. And one of the big important parts of that is to share the value of design around the wider organization, to get marketing, to get finance, to get IT, understanding what design can bring. However, to be taken seriously, you need to start developing a fluency in business. And this isn't just for design leaders as well. I love designers, but we do love our design jargon. And often we just sit the things that we know because we're doing it for 20 years, we think it should be obvious to everybody. And just having the ability to translate the things you know in design into a language that business understands is really, really important. And the end result of this is I see a lot of designers creating this us and them behavior. Oh, well, business doesn't want us to do this. Oh, business is a blocker on that. The reality is if you are a design team, you are part of the business. You are not separate. You are not other. And if you start othering yourself by using that kind of language, then is it any surprise that your other stakeholders are going to either see you as difficult or try and find ways to get around the blockage? So you need to embed yourself in the business. You need to understand the business metrics. You need to understand the language. And you need to be able to sell. The best designers are ones that don't just do beautiful interfaces, but get those interfaces into production as quickly and efficiently as possible. I think other design leaders, basically, this is their core skill, to be a shit umbrella. There's a load of crap coming down at the design team from all kinds of places. And great design leaders basically shield their design team from all the crap. And bad leaders basically funnel it through and spray everyone's crap all over the design team. And that means that the design leaders don't get any crap on them, but they just share it evenly on the rest of the team, which isn't much fun. So be a shit umbrella. And when I say shit, I mean not an umbrella that's not very good, obviously an umbrella to protect you from the shit. Okay, finally, managing down, looking after the team. If you're a design leader, you need to look after your team as though they were your own family. So don't spend all your time managing up. I'm sure we've all had managers that you almost never see, that are running around kissing the asses of everybody else. And you're sat here going, I really wish, like I'd had my one-on-one this week because I've got important stuff to say. But my managers ditched me 3 or 4 times because they're sucking up the VP, probably because they want to be the VP at some stage. But I have to admit, I can understand why. Like, you designers, you're tough people to manage because you give a shit. And if people give a shit, they are demanding. They are hard because they're hard to please. So the other thing I would say is if you have a manager, particularly a new manager, maybe who was an individual contributor 6, 9, 12 months ago, do try and go easy on them because actually they're probably having a tougher time than you think. But I think design leaders, again, we need to exercise our empathy. We need to kind of connect with the team. So take an interest in people's lives. Know the names of their partners. Know the names of their family. Know what they do at the weekend. Don't just see people as a resource. See people as a human being. Make sure you have regular one-on-ones. And the regular one-on-ones shouldn't just be check-ins. Oh, how's your project going? The one-on-one should be, how can I help you grow as a designer? How can I help you grow as a developer? How can I help you push your career forwards? And part of this, one-on-ones are great, but not always do people come to you with the sort of, information. If you're waiting for a 2-week cadence, you might miss stuff. So be present. Don't just bounce from meeting room to meeting room. Walk the floors. Hang out by the coffee machine. Just chat to people. Quite often, some of the most impactful conversation I have aren't in one-on-one meetings, but just at the sort of, the coffee machine waiting for coffee. Oh, how's your project going? How's life? Yada, yada, yada. When you do give feedback, make sure it's actionable. The number of times I'm sure we've all been in sort of feedback sessions where we're told we're not doing something right, but we don't understand how we can change it. It's really, really tough. When you give feedback, make sure you give it with kindness. If any of you have read Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, it's a bit of a kind of a, it's a bit of a Silicon Valley thing, to be honest. If you ever watched the TV show Silicon Valley, the term came up in one of their episodes. So you've kind of reached peak bullshit when you get lampooned in a comedy show. But there's something right about this. I think you've got these 2 angles. You need to care deeply about your staff, and you need to challenge them. If you care deeply but don't challenge them, you fall into this sort of ruinous empathy quarter, which is where a lot of Brits are. We care, but we don't like sort of confrontation. A lot of Americans, I find, not casting aspersions, kind of go in a different direction. They're kind of a little bit abrupt, and you can find, oh shit, man, you think you've done something wrong when it's just, they're just oversharing maybe. So try and hit that sweet point where you're kind of giving feedback that is intended to improve the person. But to do that, you've demonstrated that you really care about their progress and not just caring about yourself and your quarterly targets. I think it's really also important to be praised publicly and critiqued privately. I had a client we worked with that would have these weekly stand-ups. I had about 70, 80 designers. And every week they'd bring designers on stage to kind of show their work. And the boss would come in and say, that shit, that shit, that shit. Funnily enough, after about the first month or two, people weirdly kept getting sick every Friday because it was kind of felt like bullying. You were being pulled up publicly and you were being ripped to pieces. These people thought that this was a great toughening kind of process, get them hardened with critique, but actually just made people scared. What they should have done is brought people up on stage and said, look at this amazing work this person has done. But then if there's some critique, take them out of a public space so they don't feel like they're being beat up. And supporting your team's individual growth. Quite often we join teams and we don't know what's expected of us. We don't know what we need to do or improve to get to the next level, to get that pay rise, to get that title kind of increase. The rise of progression frameworks have helped with that. A lot of people now have their own progression frameworks which say, if you're a lead, these are the sort of characteristics you need to have. If you're a principal, if you're a director, if you're a VP. And if you're working with someone who's a principal and well, why haven't I been given a raise or a job title increase for the last 6 months? Well, you can say to them, well, look, actually, you're doing this really well, but you need to work on this area. If you go to, there's a really good website called Progression App. Which has a list of a whole bunch of different progression frameworks, including the Clearleft one. So you can have a little bit of a poke around, and it will give you a good idea about how to kind of implement one of these things. Okay, so those are really the 5 key challenges I see repeating themselves over and over again. Finding talent, retaining talent, executing at pace, managing up, and managing down. I've tried to share some of my personal experiences, but I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all approach to creative leadership. A lot of it that I've said today is just a mixture of common sense and wisdom and a few little tactics. And a lot of what I said is obvious, hopefully because it's true. However, it's amazing how few people are doing this stuff effectively and actually delivering on these sound bites I've given. Because you see, while I think good leadership is easy to understand, I think it's bloody hard to execute well. So I think as leaders, we need to do a better job. And I think as people who are being led, we need to have higher expectations from the people who are managing us and leading us. So thank you very much.